morning, all the presenters and all the other participants. We've got a great 2 days lined up. I'm Tim Essington, one of the co-chairs of the steering committee. I'm not going to say too much this morning, but just want to quickly introduce the director of the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, Bevan.
Thank you, Tim. And there are plenty of seats in the middle. I want to welcome everybody to the University of Washington, and especially the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, where the sun always shines. Our students are the brightest and best, and the faculty are generous and wise. Okay, with that, it really is an honor to welcome everyone here, and especially the speakers who've traveled extraordinary distances across a continent, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the equator, even the Montlake Cut to get here and address us today. I want to thank several groups of people before I turn it over to Andre, who will continue the thank yous. And the first group are those who put this together, Tim and Andre and Julia. Where are you, Julia? Are you here yet? Julia came, as I said last night, to Tim and Andre in a dream and told them that they would be the leaders of this symposium. And instead of the usual winter quarter 10-week series of speakers, we would shift the emphasis this year to a focused symposium on a central topic in fishery management and policy issues, and that is what we're here to enjoy the next 2 days. As part of that, we also appreciate the generosity of Tanya Bevan, who agreed with this change in venue, and it was a pleasure to work with her. She saw the benefit immediately. There are a number of partners who are sponsors of this program in addition to the school, and they include, of course, the Alaska Fisheries Science Center and a number of people who we affectionately refer to as pressure points. So that would be Doug DeMaster, Bill Karp, Russ Nelson, people that Julia over the years can go to and sit for 5 minutes and extract promises of support, as well as the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. Usha and Liz Clark and Bobby Wamoto, John Stein over time have provided major funding for this event. And Washington Sea Grant has been a real collaborator over the years, but especially Tanya Bevan, and by basis of her generosity, the endowment that is the bulk of the support for this program. The series has 2 historic stanzas that finally led to the event every year. The first one was the meeting of Don Bevan and Tanya in the 60s as part of his wide travels all over the world, and including Russia. And Don was there in the context of myriad fisheries issues. He was increasingly well known at that time, essentially as a fishery diplomat. Of course, he had studied salmon and stock assessment, but he was a strong believer in the fusion of science and management as embedded into policy, and so he traveled the world speaking this theme. Met Tanya, and Tanya had degrees from the University of Moscow in fisheries and biology. She was a translator and editor of a Russian journal, and they fell in love. And they moved back to the Seattle area, where she remained with him through the balance of his 49-year career, I read the other day. I also read a quote attributed to Don that is purportedly intended to underscore his passion for, as he said, good science is good politics in the long run. And whether or not he said it, those are good words to live by. The second stanza that led to this was what I've come to think of as the week of great scoldings. And I was fairly news director, and Linda Maxson, are you here yet? Was director of development in the college, and we're sitting one day talking about endowments, the many generous endowments the school has, and she said, "Why aren't you using the Bevan endowment?" And I thought, well, this is to be a professorship. It's not there yet. But, well, you should use it. And I happened to meet with Tanya that week, and she asked about use of the Bevan endowment. And I wondered out loud if, instead of a professorship that might ultimately benefit Andre only, could we consider maybe use for students? Yeah, okay, maybe so. And then later that same week, Julia, who, unlike the Julia president, back then was sort of an opinionated, rabble-rouser, sat with me and scolded the school wasn't known well enough for conservation and sustainability. And I thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And I introduced Julia to Tanya, and Julia took it from there, and now it's all history. The Bevan Endowment is an extraordinary gift from Tanya and a number of other supporters that is the basis of the program, probably the last 7 years. And those of you who are new to the school, during breaks you might see displays of the Bevan posters from a sequence of years past. So again, thank you all for coming, and turn it over to Andre.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, as the folks want to take the seats, there's some seats. If you're looking for a seat in the middle here, there's some free seats. As co-chair of the steering committee, I'd just like to welcome everybody. It's a wonderful experience to actually be standing on this side and not planning the last-minute flights of whether they're going to let all our speakers in the country and little things like that. And of course, it's just time for Bevan. I was thinking the other day, I come back from Brisbane where I think it's of course fall in Brisbane, so it's 77, 80. And I was thinking to myself, wait a moment, why isn't it warm in Seattle? And I realized, well, you can't get warm until the Bevan series is over, because everyone knows the Bevan series happens in winter. So, you can see already that just because we're getting the Bevan series done now, the weather is automatically improving. And hopefully it'll keep going that way and you won't run out of the room. A couple of things just logistically. If you are not familiar with the building and you need the facilities, they are out the door and round the corner. Equally important is parking. If anybody does not have a parking permit or does not have a get out of jail free card, our parking officials are just across the road and they're really trying to get rid of that deficit in the budget. So if you're parking in W35 and you don't have the requisite paperwork, the next person I need to introduce is the person who's made this functionally happen. That's Megan at the top, so introduce Megan. Megan's been Megan's been the go-to person for us, and it's the reason we've got an auditorium and speakers and little things like that. Also, if you do need parking permits, she's got them in her back pocket, so please talk to her. Well, why are we here? Apart from the fact that every single year we find a new set of sustainable fisheries topics to try and address. EBFM is the buzzword that we're hearing at the moment. It's the buzzword that we all think we are working on. So if you ask somebody, are you working on ecosystem-based fisheries management, they could be anything from a taxonomist to a stock assessment modeler, and they'll all say, yes, I am definitely doing ecosystem-based fisheries management. And perhaps that's one of the challenges of this entire topic, is that what EBFM actually is, or depending on where you come from in the world, whether it's EAF, I believe we have an EAF, which is the ecosystem approach to fisheries. We have EBM, which is ecosystem-based management. And so what Tim and I have tried to do in this conference is get away from the discussion about two things. One is, what is the appropriate acronym? Now, believe it or not, you could probably have several meetings on the choice between EBFM, EBM, EAF, etc. We're trying to avoid that. The other thing that we're hopefully not going to spend too much time on is the principles and lists of EBFM. Most of the effort, it seems, in EBFM, outside of a few examples, has gone into developing the lists of things that we should be doing, as opposed to actually doing them. And in fact, they're all the things that you can think of: habitat, endangered species, ecosystem interactions, climate change. The debate seems to be, what order do we put them in lists? Or in my case, I've actually written a paper which produces lists of the lists that other people have produced. I haven't actually done anything to really advance EBFM in that sense. And the danger, I guess, that I see in EBFM, and hopefully in this conference, the Symposium is going to help us rectify that and move us in the right direction, is another term that we all know and love, which is adaptive management. Adaptive management came together in the 1970s, highly technical methodology. You're supposed to be a pure mathematician really to understand it. But if I go to anybody involved in fisheries management today and I say to them, do you do adaptive management? They'll say, absolutely. That's one of our tenets of fisheries management is adaptive management. What is adaptive management? It's whatever you want it to be. And the danger is that's where EBFM is going. EBFM is exactly what we were always doing. We're just going to relabel it. And because I've got a New Zealander in the audience, my favourite definition of adaptive management, which is a New Zealand implementation, is let's increase the quota and maybe do a little bit of monitoring. That's adaptive management in New Zealand. Hopefully that's not EBFM. So this conference is going to cover a number of issues which spans the gamut of the EBFM topic. What we're expecting in EBFM is to broaden both what we do, who we do it to, and with whom we work. So the way this conference has been set up, or symposium has been set up, is we'll be first talking about some of the tools we can use in EBFM, and in particular, how they've been applied. Again, there's a lot of development work in terms of models, of habitat, methods of looking at climate change, but actually taking those and bringing them into the management framework has been the big gap. How we actually take this stuff and use it in a practical sense. So we'll be talking about tools, we'll be talking about governance structures, we'll be talking about communities, all the implementation issues that take what is a very academic topic at times, how should we manage fisheries, and actually see it being placed in a real management context. And to that end, the steering committee, and I should introduce the steering committee if I can remember who they actually are, Tim and myself, we got that far, Mary Ruckelshaus from the Northwest Centre, Kiram Aiden, Kiram, are you here yet? There he is at the back, and Rod Fajita from Environmental Defence. We selected a set of speakers who cover the gamut from people who are involved in the science process, people who are involved in management, and people who are concerned about the interaction of those two topics and those two subject areas. Our speakers, as Dave said, come from across the planet. From the furthest, as far as I can work out by my rather poor spherical geometry, would be Tony Smith from Hobart and Andrew Constable, probably slightly further, because about 3 miles south of where Tony lives. So we've got folks from all the way from Australia through to New Zealand, and as Dave said, to Montlake, which sometimes actually can take longer to get to with the traffic than it can to get to Australia. So we've got a wide range of speakers. One thing I must announce is, well, two things. In terms of speakers, Rod Fajita was scheduled to be the opening address of the after-tea session on the board. Unfortunately, Rod is ill and won't be able to make it, and we've rescheduled some of the topics. At present, also Josh Eagle, who's scheduled to talk tomorrow morning. His wife is in hospital, I believe, and so we're working out, and this is going to be an interesting challenge, trying to work out a way that he can give his talk from the East Coast over the internet. So what you're really saying is this is almost as bad as trying to get a video to work in any presentation. We'll do our best. We're hoping that Josh will be able to participate. I'm sure you don't want to hear too much of me, so it's time to introduce our keynote speaker, and that's Jake Rice, who's currently with DFO. Jake, in fact, although I didn't think about it until I read his CV, is in some sense a reflection of how fisheries management has progressed over time, apart from aging, which we all do. You're in the plus group along with the rest of us. And we're just hoping that mortality is constant over time. So Jake got his bachelor's degree from Cornell in biology or conservation. He then took a rather different tack from most fish people and got his PhD in ornithology, which is obviously directly relevant to the EBFM topic of broadening the set of species we're concerned about. He then went into a career, briefly an academic career, but has been in with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Canada, if I've got without the little acronym which you're supposed to put up at this point, right? DFO for a number of years, and his career, as I say, spans the changes in the paradigms that we've seen. So most of Jake's career has been in what I call traditional fisheries, ecology and fisheries stock assessment, generally leading assessment groups, firstly in St. John's, Newfoundland, and then he saw briefly the error of his ways and came here to the west coast in Nanaimo, and unfortunately has to split his life, so he's ended up in the middle of Canada, where he is currently the senior national advisor for ecosystem sciences. Again, a reflection of how things and topics have changed, in particular in DFO. I haven't got time to discuss all of Jake's committees, honours, his 200 or so publications, because you actually want to hear him, not me. But there are a few things I think that I should bring to your attention. One is he's currently session lead and going to be organising a Pisces IC Symposium on climate change and marine fish populations. Again, a key EBFM topic. He's been involved in CBD expert workshops on criteria for identifying biologically and ecologically significant areas in the high seas. He's been involved in the Marine Stewardship Council on their criteria for evaluating environmentally well-managed fisheries, been involved in a number of FAO expert consultations, including climate change and how to modify the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fishing to include ecosystem considerations. And finally, I believe he was one of those who was involved in drafting the Reykjavik Declaration, which was, seems like last year, but it's quite a few years ago now. Don't tell me, no. And that was a fairly significant multinational declaration that came out of it. It was an FAO thing, wasn't it? Yeah, FAO workshop. Well, I'll stop at this point and turn over to Jake, whose keynote address is, "After the revolution, you have to govern well. Can we deliver on the great promises of the ecosystem approach?" Now, can we find your talk? Okay.
Desktop under.
Okay. Thursday AM. Which one do you want? 3 or blue?
Blue.
Blue.
As usual, once Andre gets started, I realize I've got nothing left to say. He's done a good job giving my talk. I gather he's been rehabilitated. We can show his picture in this country now. I don't read enough Spanish to know if the quote actually did come from him on an interview on his 25th anniversary in power or not. But I still think it's a good model for how to think about what we have ahead of us. It's now mandatory if you go to PowerPoint school, they tell you the first slide you have to show after the title is how you structured your talk. So this is how I've structured my talk.